Welcome everyone to today's webinar hosted by Perceptiv Digital and Shopify. Today's topic is Unlocking E-commerce Growth, Mastering Platform Migration. And now I'll tell you a little bit about our presenters. Igor Surgeon, CEO and Director, Perceptiv Digital and Performant. As an e-commerce strategist and the CEO of Perceptiv Digital and Performant, Igor Surgeon has a proven track record in helping brands re-platform to Shopify. His deep understanding of the platform and strategic insights have enabled e-commerce brands to optimize their online operations and achieve significant performance improvements. We also have Jordan Little, Lead Project Manager, Perceptiv Digital and Performant. Jordan brings unparalleled expertise to the table in managing re-platforming projects, known for his ability to deliver complex projects on time and on budget. Jordan's leadership ensures a smooth and efficient transition for brands moving to Shopify. And we also have Jacob Hodes, Head of E-commerce, IconByDesign, and Top 50 People in E-commerce. Jacob cut his teeth in consulting, driving digital transformation at some of Australia's most recognized brands. After experiencing a range of industries, he found himself drawn to the dynamic world of e-commerce and has been immersed in it ever since. Thank you again for joining today. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Igor.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for this panel style discussion as we tackle some of the biggest questions that brands wrestle with when thinking about migrations. So whether you're watching this live or watching a replay, what we're going to cover over the next 30 to 40 minutes is really a comprehensive understanding of the migration process and how the topic of migration is really a key consideration to your overall growth strategy. For e-com brands, we know that technology can either be an enabler of growth or a constraint to growth. So that's what we're going to dive into. We're going to look at how a brand might prepare for a migration, what a seamless migration looks like. We're going to look at some points of hesitance, how to prevent, overcome, and avoid some of these common mistakes. And we're going to hear from Jacob all throughout as he's recently been through a migration. So strap in, and if at any point you do have any questions that you'd like us to go into more depth, please use the chat, and if we have time, we'll take those questions at the end. And if you do want to continue the discussion with us about your specific use case, type me in the chat at any point, and we'll reach out to discuss this further with you. So before we dive into the panel discussion, Jacob, Head of Ecom at IconByDesign, thanks for joining us and sharing your insights and experience. Here's your 30 seconds of fame. Tell us about your role and tell us about IconByDesign.
Thank you, Igor. As you mentioned, my name is Jacob. I'm very happy to be here. It's always a bit interesting hearing yourself get introduced. I'm so happy to do my own intro at this stage. I am the Head of Ecom at IconByDesign. IconByDesign is a direct-to-consumer omni-channel furniture brand that focuses really on authenticity of materials, timeless designs, and artisan craftsmanship. My role as the head of e-commerce is really making the most of all of our digital touchpoints, primarily our website, and then ensuring that the website plays nicely with our showrooms, our care teams, our marketing efforts, and all the other digital support systems that come to play.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thanks for joining us again. And I guess shameless plug for IconByDesign. I do have one of your dining sets, and I can vouch for the quality being amazing, and it looks great. All right, let's dive in. We're going to cover 13 questions together. I'm excited, so let's jump into question one. I'll kick us off. So question one is, what are the top reasons that companies are considering or should consider a migration in the next 6 to 12 months? So I would say from my perspective, there are lots of reasons, obviously, and often unique to each company. However, I would say the common thread is really just brands avoiding certain issues, so getting away from pain points, or looking for new functionality. So for brands, new features, new possibilities equal new opportunities. And so really it's kind of the classic moving away from pain and moving toward pleasure scenario. But I guess if I had to distill it down to the top reasons, I would say functionality gaps or lack of platform innovation. Brands really don't want to feel constrained. Modern integrations and apps is another one. So brands really want to feel like anything is possible. And the other one is, we come from a, I guess, history of brands having fragmented systems, and as the maturity of these platforms has, I guess, reached this point, especially something like Shopify Plus, brands are looking to consolidate and simplify. And as part of that, they're also looking at their total cost of ownership. And typically when you do consolidate, you do see that total cost of ownership come down. And so I'd say those are the top reasons that I've seen. Jordan, love to hear from you. I guess what's been your experience so far with the brands that we've worked with and some of their reasons for migrating?
Yeah, so in my experience, brands have typically struggled to deploy new features without having a dev team. And so that typically speaks to more established brands with a more complex tech stack, where you require a dev to build these sorts of features out. So simple things such as pre-order functionality takes a week or two to build, deploy, and test. And something Shopify does really, really well through constant innovation and bridging these gaps both natively and through their comprehensive app ecosystem. And as a result, brands are able to roll out these features a whole lot quicker. And so you can imagine a world where you think of an idea, you want to roll it out, so you go to the App Store, you download an app, and within that same day, you have the outcome. And so we're currently working with a brand who's moving from Magento to Shopify, and typically features like pre-order have been very complex to roll out. It's been costly, it's been time-consuming, and the result has been subpar. And so it's been a pleasure watching this brand transition into a more agile platform as they sort of discover the simplicity that's on offer. It doesn't have to be that complicated. Don't get me wrong, there is place for complex tech stacks, but if you don't need one, then why have one? And so it's really critical to understand when one is required and when one isn't. Another big reason or big motivation for brands wanting to move platforms is just general stability. There are a lot of open source e-com platforms out there, and things can get messy really quick when you've got a bunch of dev teams working on it or different people. And it allows for heavy customization, which is a good thing, but it can open up to just issues and general volatility. And so seeing brands struggle to maintain a stable environment has generally led them to migrating to a managed platform such as Shopify. Jake, obviously you went through this phase internally. What are your top reasons?
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. I think that you guys are both pretty well covered. Like, we touched on a whole bunch of the reasons that you've covered, and I think ultimately it sum it up into, Igor, you put it as, avoiding pain and seeking pleasure. And the platform that we were on had substantial amounts of pain, both in terms of functionality that didn't exist or functionality that did exist but was painful to use, or system limitations. Like, one thing that came up was we just couldn't add enough data fields to our product. And it's, in 2024, it seems kind of silly that you couldn't just add a new field for all the attributes, but those were limitations that we ran into. So there was the pain there. And then there's the pleasure of, again, it's kind of two sides to the same coin, things that we wanted to be able to do, thought that we should be able to do that we couldn't. And then we saw this, this vision on the horizon of other platforms. We saw our competitors doing things really easily that we couldn't do. So we were seeking that pleasure. I think that really, it's those two sides of the equation that were our key drivers. We couldn't get what we needed to do done on the existing platform, or if we did it, it was really complicated. And then there was new features that we wanted to unlock that we were looking for in other platforms.
Thanks for that, Jake. So yeah, moving on to the next question. This is kind of the other side of that coin. We've looked at the top reasons for replatforming, but what about the top reasons that cause hesitance? So let's address the elephant in the room. What are the greatest hesitations that brands have when it comes to platform migrations?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So, 100%, there are lots of reasons to hesitate, some good, some bad. Let's jump into some of them. So I think we have to remember that replatforming does present a whole lot of business impact. And so brands naturally worry about operational and sale consistency. They worry about traffic risks. They worry about retraining implications and a whole lot more. But I guess if I have to summarize some of the biggest worries for brands, they've been around how this might impact their sales in the short term, especially for brands who are online only. Revenue is the #1 issue for them. What is the scale of the change as well? So are we simply replatforming, or are we also now looking at ERPs or inventory solutions? Are we having to migrate legacy processes? Do we have to take our whole company and the whole team across? So there's lots of potentially daunting implications that brands need to deal with. And the other one, and this is probably one of the biggest ones I guess this will be the question that brands start with, funnily enough, is how long is this going to take and how much will it cost? And that's always an interesting topic. Obviously, there's a lot more that can be said about each one. But Jake, you've been through this recently. What did this look like for you guys?
Yeah, we did go through it recently, and the truth for mine is that the big hesitation is really around risk. Now, you wouldn't be considering like no one's replatforming onto a worse system. No one's trying to get onto something worse. So the question is, what risk is there in getting onto this newer system? And you can see the promised land, but will you actually be able to get there, or are you going to end up bogged down in a complex project or whatever the case might be? The other piece is then, obviously, if we're talking about like a platform migration, in this context, we're talking about an e-commerce platform, there might be the promised land of e-commerce, but how does that tie into all the rest of your systems? And does it disrupt your supply and operations processes? How do those integrations fit together? Does it disrupt your store teams? If you're an omni-channel business like we are, well, how does the store and the physical store and the online store play nicely together? How does it impact marketing functions? So whether that be feeds into marketing engines or creating landing pages, all of those things, the hesitation is the risk of we won't actually get there, or it won't actually deliver on the promise that's being made, because the promises are easy to make.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think at this point, if a brand is listening to this, they might be tempted to think it's all too hard. There are lots of things to think about. But we would say, through good planning, there is good news. And so I guess let's dive into an example through the next question of how risk and concern can be mitigated through a migration process. So this question, Jordan, would be great for you to speak into. But what are the 3 things companies, or picking one of these top hesitations that you mentioned, how do you address these with your clients?
Thanks, Igor. So yeah, as you alluded to, there's the whole ERP or IMS side of things. And so that typically is one of the biggest hesitations. So you have 2 types of e-com brands, ones that have typically relied on their e-com platform for inventory management, and it's more of a consolidated approach. And then you have those brands that have an existing ERP system, such as NetSuite, Zoho, Microsoft Dynamics, and they want to ensure that connection or that flow is maintained. And so speaking to the first brand type, there are a few hesitations that I've seen, such as how will my staff learn how to use the system? It's a big change. And how long will it take for them to get used to it? Is it going to be 6 months of errors and fixing and doing overtime to do those things? And then lastly, how expensive is that going to be? Because some of those integrations can really get quite costly. And the second brand with the existing integration, more so, they just don't want to destabilize their integration. They have something that works. They don't want to risk something that works. And so questions like, will the setup be the same? Will our customizations work with this new integration or this new platform? And so we address this as an agency by having integration partners that specialize in this sort of thing. So as an agency, we also have a good knowledge and understanding of the ERP systems, their native integrations. We can also build custom integrations, but it's critical to have someone who specializes in that piece. And taking a hand-in-hand approach with that partner, we're able to deliver a stress-free experience. And so all of their questions around customizations and costing and all those sorts of things can be answered in collaboration with this partner. And we come at it from more of a e-com specialist side. So we understand the platform, we understand how the ERP needs to talk to the platform and vice versa. And so we can speak into that. But that is generally the biggest hesitation that I come across, and that's how we deal with it.
Yeah, awesome. And I think I'll inject my 2 cents here. So another big one is around brands losing their marketing performance, or more specifically their rankings. You can imagine that's quite a daunting idea. And they're really telling us, like, don't touch my money, basically, when we go through a migration, which is fair enough. But really giving, part of the exercise is giving our clients a dose of reality that even with the best migration plan, the brand might see a potential revenue dip in the first couple of months. So it's important to have those conversations and how to mitigate those risks. And this is why we really want to stress that having the right people with the right experience and skill set is crucial. We've heard some shocking stories where this is done badly, and brands really suffer post-migration. Jake, I guess if you had to point to one aspect of the process that maybe for you started as a hesitation or a confusion that turned into clarity, what would that be?
Yeah, I think there's typically heaps of options to choose from. We were pretty fortunate in that we got a reasonable amount of experience internally in this space, but the one example that really comes to mind was our business is quite unique in that we have both buy now, we effectively run two supply chains. So you can buy the furniture existing stock from existing stock, or you can pre-order. Neither of those two concepts are unique, but having them both running concurrently is very unique, and none of it comes out of the box. And historically, we solved that problem by having two versions of the same product. So we'd have a buy now and pre-order, and then a whole bunch of smarts and automations and ERP configurations and all the stuff downstream that actually allowed us to manage that and consolidate them into a single product. In this transition, we actually moved from this kind of two product paradigm to a single product paradigm, which simplifies a whole bunch of those things downstream. But obviously, if we're changing this core part of our product architecture, well, how's that going to play out, and how do we manage the differences in prices? How do we manage stock between the two things? So there were big questions there, which we had to solve them. It wasn't clear what the solution would be when we went into it, but we knew that that was a big, hairy challenge that we would have to tackle. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't get to that promised land that we were talking about. And while this was originally not all that clear, there were some ideas about potential solutions. The eventual solution actually ended up being quite elegant and kind of better than we were anticipating it being. And so I guess credit to the team for solving that one, because it wasn't an easy one. But yeah, that to me was one that the flexibility in the platform actually allowed us to not only get the simplicity on the Shopify side and on the e-commerce side, but feed it in correctly into the ERP side. So the ERP we didn't have to do the ERP system at the same time. It was one of our requirements, is that we're not going to do both at the same time, because one migration is complex enough. Two migrations at the same time, you're going to need a bigger boat.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was so happy when we figured out a solution for that. I think, well, everyone was. So that was a really good outcome. Awesome. All right, let's keep going. Question 4. So what are the 3 things a company needs to be clear about or consider when preparing for a migration? And maybe Jake, let's maybe start with your perspective on this. What did this look like for you guys?
Yeah, cool. And I think I'm in some ways uniquely positioned to answer this, because obviously I'm in the business now and leading the e-commerce function at IconByDesign, but I was also on the other side of this as a consultant. So I've seen many of these projects before. The things for me, the kind of big 3. One is understanding what your key business functions are. So things that if this breaks or if this doesn't work correctly, the business stops. So know what those points are way ahead of time and make sure that you're giving them sufficient attention. Then there's another kind of theme that is really important, and it'll probably come up a little bit later as well, is where is the complexity in your business? So in furniture, we have lots of data points. I mentioned before we couldn't add enough data fields. There's on average 150 data points on a piece of furniture, at least for us there are. So we've got all this data. The system needs to do that. A food company doesn't have that issue, but they have perishable goods. If you're a supplement company, you've got regulatory requirements that if you're a fashion company, you've got trends. So understanding where the complexity is in your business and the specific vertical that you're in is really essential. And then the last piece that I think is really critical to understand is where you can, where to customize versus where to go with an out-of-the-box implementation. Customization is generally best avoided if you can avoid it, because when you customize, especially when you're going from a platform like Shopify that's managed and has billions of dollars of R&D and engineers making sure that everything works really smoothly, that's the best outcome if it's all managed and all out of the box. However, sometimes you do need to customize, and really taking that critical lens to where do you customize the technology versus where do you actually say, you know what, we're going to stick with out-of-the-box functionality and we're going to retrain our team on a slightly different process. And if it doesn't make a difference, or if you can flex either way, I think being really clear about what are the things that must be true and what are the things that you can actually flex a little bit on and making that decision.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if I had to, I guess, zoom out, I would probably just sum up those as being clear on the problems you're solving, being clear on the whole business impact, being clear on the costs and timeframes, and I guess bonus point number 4 is selecting the right partner or partners to get the job done well. Again, a lot more can be said about this. If you do have any further questions, do pop them in the chat and we can cover them later. All right, so let's get into process. So what does a well-executed migration look and feel like? So Jordan, I guess you've been at the forefront of leading brands through their replatforming journey. So how do you discover, plan, and execute in a way that takes these numerous steps and stakeholders from start to finish, and maybe even put a smile on their face at the end?
Thanks, Igor. Yeah, I think the key there is just, the phased approach. So breaking it down into the discovery phase, the build phase, launch, support, and maintenance. And so it's really, really critical that that discovery phase is done properly. If we don't do that properly, then we aren't able to plan properly and therefore can't execute. And so the discovery phase can last anywhere between 2 to 8 weeks. And that's absolutely critical to get everything right, understand the business requirements. And the build phase and planning phase is also obviously just as important, but it's having things clearly mapped out. So understanding the milestones, understanding the dependencies, who's responsible for what, being in constant communication with the client so they have clarity over what's next, what am I responsible for, what are you responsible for, what are the key deliverables. And so it's also crucial to have realistic deadlines. You can expect some curveballs. There's always going to be something that goes slightly wrong, but being able to preempt those and build in a level of contingency into the project just allows for those curveballs to come and not affect the overall timeline. I think another critical piece to making it feel good and keeping a smile on the face is just having regular meeting cadence. So, whether that's once a week, twice a week, or even daily, more towards the end, just before launch or post-launch. It's having a clear agenda set for those meetings and just clear communication. And so that will drive clarity of outcomes and it'll ensure that the target timeline is achieved. There's a lot more in that question. And so that's it at a very high level. But yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And Jake, I guess you've worked closely with Jordan on your migration. What did you think of the process, and in hindsight, what makes for a successful migration project?
Yeah, maybe I was working a little bit more closely than Jordan would have been comfortable with by the end of it. But no, the truth is, I thought it was like, I wouldn't be here if I didn't think it was well executed. So spoiler alert to anyone in the audience. For me, what does a successful project look like? And kind of how do you get there? It starts with the requirements, right? You have to understand exactly what you're building. You've got to be really clear on what the desired outcome is. So ensuring you've got clarity there is really, really essential. Jordan, you mentioned this, understanding complexity. I mentioned before, talking about complexity of your specific business. So for us, another classic in furniture is shipping. Shipping furniture around the country that breaks easily and is heavy and bulky, and it's complicated and requires assembly. So there's many layers to that onion. Whereas if you're selling t-shirts, you just put it in the mail and ship it. So understanding the complexities of your business, and then understanding, what are the areas that are always complex, right? Like submitting an order from an e-commerce system into an ERP system is always going to be complex. So understanding the generic complexity and understanding the specific complexity is really essential. Expect some curveballs. Jordan, you mentioned this as well. Expect some curveballs, allow some contingency. Is obviously, that's all part of that discovery and planning phase. In terms of the execution, execution is kind of based on how good your plan is and how well you adhere to that plan. So understanding what are the dependencies, what are activities that can be done in parallel, what's the critical path that needs to be executed that's going to drive out the project timeline versus things that if they slip to a later date, well, they can be done again in parallel. So that kind of project management methodology is really clear. And in terms of what does good feel like, I guess when all of that comes together, it starts to feel like the kind of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? There's this smooth flow of data. Everyone's getting to the meeting and knows what to expect. You've got this rhythm. There's a momentum that comes into a project when things are running smoothly, and you've got clear requirements, you've got clear and appropriate timelines, all the resources are available, and you've got these handovers like a relay race where things are kind of moving smoothly. Like that's what good feels like to me, at least in my experience. So yeah, that's what I would say is what you're going to look out for in your project.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, we didn't have any curveballs with your project, right? So it was very smooth sailing all the way through. Just kidding, of course. But I think it just reiterates the point that, like what I really enjoyed with working with you guys is that you guys are highly competent at what you're doing. And so when we faced any curveballs, and curveballs will come, we were able to solve it as a team. And I think that's really the key. All right, we had a look at the process. Let's jump into a timing question. This one's an interesting one. When is the right time to migrate? When should you postpone a migration? So I'll kick us off. I guess there are two sides to this question for me. Is there a right time to migrate or go through that process? Well, probably not. It's a process that really takes a long time, takes months to execute, impacts everyone in the business. So it's not really something that anyone wakes up wanting to do. But I think from a growth perspective, and it has to be a growth question, is there a right time to think about initiative migration from that growth perspective? Absolutely. And this really takes us back to the first two questions, talking about the top reasons and the hesitations. And so really what the brands have to be clear about is, do we actually have clearly articulated reasons why we can't stay where we are and why we must move in order to grow? Do we have a deep understanding of the risks and challenges and an appetite to push ahead? And do we have the right people to get us there? And I think the biggest reasons I've seen brands postpone migrations is because of costs. Maybe they don't realize how big an undertaking this is and how much it would cost. The other one is sales seasonality. So obviously you don't want to migrate or go live with a new platform during your sale peak season. The other one is that lack of stakeholder engagement or alignment. Again, whole of business impact. So if you haven't done the work to collate all the pain points and all the potential solutions and get everyone on the same page, it's probably not a good time to kind of pull that plug. And the other one, I guess the last one for me is, and we don't see this a whole lot, but sometimes we do see brands coming to us with what they deem to be problems. In other words, they don't think something is possible in their platform, and we'll come back with solutions. Actually, it is possible. And that might even postpone the migration or even derail the migration plan altogether. Jake, keen to hear from you. Was there a right time for you guys to migrate?
I think, yeah, so to answer that question, there's kind of two sides to it, right? One is that I would say there's never really a right time to migrate. Like there's never a right time to perform open heart surgery. But sometimes there's a pressing need and you have to do it anyway. So with that kind of taken into account, I would say that it's more framed around like when are the wrong times, like when are bad times to migrate and when should you definitely avoid migrating. And for me, it's pretty simple, right? It's think about the seasonality of your business. Like if you're a retailer, you don't want to be migrating during Black Friday. Think about when, so think about that seasonality. Think about the availability of resources. So like do you have design capacity available? Are all the SMEs in the business, so all the various teams available? Is there sufficient capacity within the business to actually execute? And does the partner that you're working with have those resources available to work with as well? So making sure that the people are there. And then the last piece is that, so sometimes migration is like, migration like this would be a kind of technology or an e-commerce project, but it's really essential to, I think, talk about like management attention and leadership attention. It's not just do you have the resources available, but is there the sufficient leadership in the business available to like remove blockers if they arise and make sure that the constraint is being addressed, whether that be, hey, we need somebody from the store team to answer questions that are going to be on the critical path for the setup of the website, but they're needed in store because the store is understaffed, right? So that's a kind of resourcing issue that might arise. You need that kind of senior level leadership to be able to push through those blockers and like some blockers will arise. You should expect that there will be something that goes wrong. Doesn't matter how well you plan it, there will always be a curveball. So making sure that there's leadership attention available to make sure that the project gets the love and care that it deserves.
Yeah, and I think that was such a good experience working with you guys as well. You guys kind of kept the pressure, and we kept the pressure, and it led to good outcomes. We've also seen brands that kind of commit to a migration, but then they don't have that availability of management attention. It really causes delays, and so I think that's an important point.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So yeah, before we keep going, I know we're covering a lot, and so if you do have any questions, please type them into the chat, or you can type me and we'll get in touch with you to continue the conversation. Let's move on to the next question. Do you have any examples of when a migration has gone wrong? How can this be avoided?
Yeah, I mean, Jake, I remember you telling me some more stories from your past, so why don't you kick this off for us?
Yeah, I wish I had less examples to answer this question, but unfortunately I do. One that kind of springs to mind, the biggest one, right? Again, from back in the consulting days, I was working on a tier 1 telco client. And I guess I would say that how it went wrong was this kind of clash of what I would describe as principles versus practicals. You have these principles of how a project should work, and then you have like the rubber meeting the road. There's a great quote from Oppenheimer, which came out not that long ago, that I don't know if he actually said it, but the theory will only take you so far. And what we were seeing was that, yeah, we had this theoretical agile approach where the teams will self-organize and all the requirements will emerge from the workshops. And we got to the end of this discovery phase, and it's like none of the people in the workshops were like seasoned veterans who knew the industry. So we missed a bunch of requirements. And then the plan was kind of really generic, and it needed this like hardcore specific industry knowledge to actually be in there. So yeah, just summarizing it pretty quickly is like making sure that the specifics are taken care of for your integration, your industry, your business, as opposed to a generic cookie cutter migration, because there's no such thing. So that's what I would say is what went wrong and how you'd avoid it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think a lot, obviously a lot can go wrong with migrations. And I really think that this is where our team's diligence and experience really drives success. We've seen so many agencies botch migrations, but not knowing really the steps and how to execute them well. One thing that I see more often than I like is brands working with agencies who maybe know the incoming platform. So let's say they're moving to Shopify, but they don't really know the outgoing platform. And this has led to big issues and delays. We'd have to really interject and really rescue some of those brands. So one thing I guess I can't drive that point enough to brands is don't trust something like a migration to someone who doesn't have a proven track record and really understands both platforms and your business. Another example I can throw out is a brand who was doing both a platform and an ERP migration, and they chose an ERP integration agency. Really didn't understand Shopify and how to get the best data architecture in place. And this is obviously a big issue. Now, I guess in hindsight, from that lesson, we take a far more active role in helping our clients choose that ERP platform. And if they do need an integration partner, also help them with that step as well. Jordan, I don't know if there's anything else you can add to that.
I think you guys covered it pretty well. I just really like to drive home the point of meticulous planning and stakeholder engagement. And so doing that will surface any of the issues, and they'll be able to be solutions will come out for those issues before there's any actual problems. And as an agency, one of our core values is to outknow everyone in the room. And so that means for us, it's not just platform knowledge, but it's also an understanding of the ERP systems, which is something you mentioned, Igor. And it's only through going through these migrations in the past that we've had this experience. And so really, the unique positions that we've been in have led us to the right conversations, to be able to pull the right people into the room. And so that allows us to plan and not leave anything to chance. But yeah, moving on to the next question. What are the most common benefits noticed after switching to Shopify? Jake, this one's for you. How are you going with Shopify Plus so far?
Yeah, cool. Happy to talk to this one. I mean, for starters, it's got a much more intuitive interface for a range of tasks. So things like landing page building was one of those other specific issues that we needed to solve as our business. We needed the ability to build landing pages. The system we moved from didn't really have that functionality, or had it in a very limited fashion. So landing page building, bulk product editor, introduction of things like meta objects, the ability to create flows, those kinds of things were really enablers. Definitely site speed was dramatically improved on Shopify. And then more flexibility in APIs, allowing for customization. So we're a reasonably techie company. We do a bit of integration ourselves using kind of configurable platforms like Zapier and Integromat or Make, or there's a bunch of options. So we do a fair bit of that ourselves. And then having this like really solid API from Shopify that we could tap into gave us that flexibility. Igor, you're talking about like feeling unrestricted. That was really helpful for us. And then obviously there's access to the app ecosystem that allows us to, I think apps get you a lot of the time 80% of the way there, not quite 100% of the way there, but most of the time if you can get 80% of the way there in a day and test out a functionality, then that's way better than spending 2 weeks to test functionality and then finding out it doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I'd love to add to that. I think one of the biggest perks I see, and you mentioned this, Jake, already, is around marketing enablement. Both at a personal level, so like enabling in-house teams to build pages and do things that otherwise would be done by devs, and really also at a growth level. So having that huge app ecosystem, or simply just a highly capable API, makes brands feel like they can do anything they want. And so brands want to feel unrestricted, and Shopify, especially Shopify Plus, really makes them feel this way. We've just seen another editions drop, and it's quite an exciting read, right? Like we're getting lots and lots of new capability, and for brands, that's exciting. All right, let's see the next question. So Jake, I guess I would say that the next few questions are largely opportunities for you to speak into your recent experience. So let's dive into this one. How did you begin the evaluation process, both for a new platform and an implementation partner?
Yeah, sure. So for us, quite specifically, the need was initially around the platform, right? So our current platform wasn't meeting our needs, so we knew we needed to get onto something else. So that kind of made the decision for us. Yes, we need to figure something out. Then we had a look at the industry. What do our competitors use? What do similar people in the industry use? And what are the options available? We quickly ruled out enterprise solutions. We're not, there's some solutions that are like obviously inappropriate based on your needs. So rule those ones out first. And then of the remaining contenders, we actually had a look at what resources we had available to support. And from our side, we actually already had our US business was already on Shopify of a much older implementation. So we had a little bit of a bias there. And then we looked at, again, resources available to support. And we'd been working with Perceptiv for a number of years. We knew they had really deep specialization there, and we trusted them to do a good job. So that kind of made the decision for us. And I mean, Igor, Jordan, I don't know how much you know the extent of this. We actually did speak to a number of other agencies and talking to different platforms. And the decision that we came on is that like Shopify has the functionality. We know that we can, we're confident that we can get to what we need to with Shopify, and we know we have a partner who can deliver what we needed to deliver. So that was kind of became an easy decision for us in many ways.
Yeah, perfect. All right, what about the most important features of functionality you were looking for?
Yeah, cool. So I've probably touched on most of these already by now. One is, and it comes down to understanding your unique requirements as a business. So for us, it was unlimited meta fields or unlimited data fields on products because we have 100 plus. We needed a landing page builder that was like intuitive that a marketing team could use because they need to build it to match their campaigns. And then that last piece that I spoke about, the one that ended up being a concern that ended up being quite an elegant solution is the flexibility to match our business model and our merchandising requirements. So we've got reasonably complex sale rules. Our business model is unique where we've got buy now and pre-order, and you can save on pre-order, but there's all kinds of quirks there. So for us, it was really around that flexibility of merchandising and business model, the landing page builder, and then data fields. Now, that's not to say that those were the only functions that we wanted, but those were the specific places where the existing platform was falling short and we needed to move on to a different platform.
Yeah, makes sense. Awesome. So tell us a little bit about how you budgeted for the platform. What considerations did you take into account?
Yeah, sure. So our replatform was something of a burning platform scenario. Again, like we needed to move off the other platform. So it wasn't really a question of should we, it was a question of what do we switch to and how much is it going to cost? ROI becomes like at the top level, it's a pretty easy calculation. You can see how much the platform is going to cost within some degree of certainty based on your sales. And when you do the math, you say, cool, if I can increase my online revenue by X%, the platform pays for itself. And usually it's not a very large percentage when you have a modestly sized business. So that calculation is really easy to do. I think what's more complex is factoring in the non-monetary costs. So things like the effort, time to execute, the opportunity cost of spending the time, and like I mentioned before, that management attention on the project, well, that opportunity cost is another part that you need to kind of bring into the ROI. But I think that, again, when you start to look at, hey, if I can increase my conversion rate by 10% because of just a site speed improvement, well, you can afford a lot of platform with a 10% increase in conversion rate. We also had the added benefit of, like I mentioned before, we were on Shopify in the US. So consolidating into Australia meant that we only had like one set of controls that we needed to learn, one set of administration that we needed to follow. And when we solve a problem, like a UX problem, we solved it once and applied it to both sites as opposed to needing to solve the problem in two different platforms.
So this one is interesting as well. So is there anything you wish you had known before you migrated to Shopify Plus, or any advice you'd give to people looking to make a similar transition?
Yeah, I think for us, like there was all things that could have been more positive rather than things that were negative, right? So we used a number of brand new features in our build, like functions and cart transform API and all that good stuff. And perhaps we didn't leverage them fully off the bat. We're obviously going through that transition now, but if we knew ahead of time in more detail what we could have done, then perhaps we would have, approached things a little bit differently. So from a customer perspective, if you're thinking about a migration, I'd say like know your use cases, know the functionality, like read through the new releases and understand what is available in the platform, and then you can reverse engineer that onto your business and see where is the opportunity for you, and then pick your places where you want to deep dive and really drive that value.
All right, so this is the last question we'll cover formally before we go into Q&A. So let me just reiterate, if anyone has any questions they would like us to cover, now is the time to get them into the chat. And certainly if you'd like to continue the discussion with us, you can type me in the chat as well and we'll reach out. So this one, Jake, how's the new website functioning, and are there any early insights or wins you can share?
Yeah, sure. So so it's functioning way better is the top line view. And I mean, even as basic as things like website uptime is better. Functionality is dramatically improved. The ability to execute things on the back end, again, as a business user, it's way easier to do a whole bunch of things in Shopify than it was to do in our previous platform. Things like the bulk product editor, which is with the advent of meta fields, now you can do reasonably complex bulk product editing in the Shopify backend, which historically you couldn't. Shopify has come a tremendously long, like it's come really far, really fast in the last few years. So that's really powerful. I mentioned before, things like landing page creation is really easy now, discounting rules, workflow setups, all of that kind of stuff becomes much easier from an administration standpoint. We've obviously still got a long journey ahead of us in terms of, everyone does, but in terms of CRO, in terms of optimizing the website itself. But what the game now is, what do we want to do? What's our hypothesis, and how do we actually, let's make the website better rather than, oh, bugger, we can't do anything that we want to do. We've got these ideas, but we can't technically execute it, or we can, but it's going to take weeks to execute, and it's all cumbersome and slow, and by the time you do it, the test is outdated. So it's really the biggest thing at this stage is the site performance, like the actual just underlying infrastructure and architecture, and then the ability to actually execute on the work of being an e-commerce leader rather than being bogged down in the technology projects. So some definite.
Yeah, I think that, again, just reminds me of that first question, brands not wanting to feel constrained. And really, like, what we love seeing is brands going from having a constrained mindset around how do we, can we, should we, to now going, okay, we can do anything we want. Now we can just think about the best customer experience, the best features, the best growth strategies. And that's really awesome to hear as well. Awesome. So this brings us to a Q&A time. Chris, happy for you to take over. Do we have any questions that we can take?
We do. One question that came in is, what platform did IconByDesign migrate from? And to extend on that, how would you recommend going about choosing the best platform to suit your needs?
Yeah, so I don't want to throw the previous platform that we used under the bus here. They served us really well for a long period of time. And the truth is, they're going through a big transformation where they're kind of rebuilding their platform to bring it into a new modern architecture. But for us, the time wasn't right. Like, we couldn't keep waiting because, like I mentioned, we had this burning platform. So I don't want to mention them by name, but yeah, it was historically served us really well, but we'd outgrown that platform in a number of ways. And I think that the kind of technology had moved on from that platform, which was now a bit of a legacy platform. So not to dodge the question, but I think that that's kind of where we were at. In terms of choosing a platform, I'll go back to my previous point about understanding exactly what your needs are as a business and making sure that you start with that, start with exactly what you need and then go to market, rather than starting with what is everything that's available in the market and then trying to find something and then trying to fit your business into one of these technologies. So start that way. Things that I would consider as well, though, is like, look at the size of look at the trajectory of the business. And again, I don't want to make this too much of a Shopify plug, but we chose Shopify for a reason. It's got the biggest ecosystem of apps. It's got the biggest ecosystem of like developers and agencies that you can work with. And it's also got the biggest budget for R&D. Like, you see these product releases that come out and it's like, wow, that's a tremendous amount that's coming out. And no one can match it. No one else can match, at least at this stage, no one can match Shopify in this space. A little bit different if you talk about enterprise, there's different players, but we're not looking for enterprise software. So for us, that stuff was all out of the question.
Great, thank you. And one more question. How long would you say the migration process takes end to end?
Yeah, so I can speak to that one, having been through it quite a few times. So it can take anywhere from 3 months to 6 to 8 months. And so it really depends on your business complexities, what we discover during that initial scoping phase. And so if you have a complex business and you want a fast track timeline, you can get it done in 3 months. That's what we did with IconByDesign. They had some complex business requirements and we were able to get that project out in 3 months, but it was very intense on both sides. And so that also depends on like internal resources from the business. How available are they? If they're not available, well, then it's going to take us a few months more because there's more work for us to do. But it is generally between 3 and 6 months and can go upwards of 6 months.
Yeah, I just add on to that, like, if you're thinking about a migration, obviously the question of how long is it going to take is a bit of a how long is a piece of string. I think 3 to 6 months is a pretty accurate guideline. There's also, if it's a issue for you, then you can actually, and Jordan made the point that we needed a short timeline because obviously we've got seasonality in the business, so we need to deliver the project in between these seasonal peaks, right? So we had a particular need to make it a short project. And what that meant is that, obviously you have to then make some compromises. Either you compromise on budget and you throw way more resources at it, or you compromise on certain parts of functionality that you say, hey, this is something that's not critical for the go live, that comes as a subsequent phase. So just thinking about that timeline, it's not necessarily fixed. Like, even within a given migration, the timeline might change based on what's really essential to you versus what is just a nice to have or something like that.
Yeah, and we do see that often brands are splitting those phases in order to get certain outcomes faster. So I think that's definitely an important point, and it's something that is worth noting as possible. We don't have to tackle a replatform and an ERP integration and a retraining of everything all at once. It can be split. There are ways to do that to get the outcome and minimize kind of the risks along the way. All right, I think that's all the time we have for Q&A. I guess as we wrap up, it goes without saying that we've only scratched the surface, and there's a lot more that can be said. Obviously, every brand has their own nuances around the issues or the constraints or the requirements, and so we'd love to continue that discussion further. If you want to do that, you can email us or give us a call, or even reach out via LinkedIn. And at the moment, we also have a migration offer that we'd love to discuss with you. So if that's something you're considering or thinking about, do reach out, and we happily share that with you. All right, well, that's all the time we have for today. If you're not on Shopify Plus yet, or have any questions about replatforming, definitely reach out. A big thank you for taking the time in your day to join us. Thank you again to Jacob Hodes as well, Head of Ecom at IconByDesign, for your input and your time. That's all for now. Take care, and we'll see you again soon.